Hi folks, Dave Schmidt here. It's May 17th as I'm coming to you today. Last week on my radio program, I had a guest, Michael Lee Hill. Michael Lee is a Nephilim, an Anunnaki human hybrid. And we had talked about the role and the history of the Anunnaki. And we had also mentioned that there's a lot of information that is out there, but the vast majority of the information is presenting the Anunnaki from one perspective. They have a tendency to present them in a dark light. Well, there's a real misunderstanding, and the reason is because most of the people that report are not able to go back and get what I call core source of information in their research. A lot of them are just quoting others, or they're putting things into their own perspective or their own perceptions of how they perceive them. And Michael Lee and I talked about the fact there are two distinct roles of the Anunnaki. And if we could simplify it, it's called good cop and bad cop roles. The Anunnaki have played a very, very good role for us that we are not aware of. Now let me talk about these core sources of information. There's always three that you are able to get. Number one, if it's based on historical issues, you do what is called the scholarly research. Who are the best scholars that have dedicated 30 and 40 years of their lives to studying this issue? Number two would be the intelligence organizations within the government, such as the NSA and others. And number three would be using a core source, would be an individual himself who is a Nephilim, an Anunnaki. Well, Michael and I have all three of those sources, and we use all three of those sources, and we absolutely believe we are using the best of those sources, and that's why we absolutely believe that this information is going to be some of the best that you're ever going to get on who are the Anunnaki and what is their role. Let's talk about these core sources. Number one are the scholars. And there is absolutely no debate that the best person who ever lived on the history of the scholarly research of the Anunnaki was a gentleman by the name of Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin was a genius. Sitchin could read the ancient Sumerian tablets just as you and I could read a book. Sitchin died about 3 years ago. But before he passed away, there was two people that worked with him and were a part of his organization for about 10 years. I've had them here on my radio program more than once, and that's Dr. Sasha Lesson and his wife Janet. They worked with Sitchin for about 10 years, and when Sitchin knew he was getting ready to pass away, he passed his baton on to Dr. Sasha Lesson. The two of them have written 3 books. They have dedicated decades of their life to understanding the historical research on the history of the Anunnaki. I asked Sasha Lesson once, are you telling me that everything that you're saying in your books is based upon archaeological history and research? And he says, absolutely yes. We don't make up anything. What we are always coming from is the place of historical research. Next are the intelligence organizations. Well, there is one that is absolutely the best on this planet. And that's an organization that goes by the code name ACIO. It stands for Advanced Contact Intelligence Organization. The ACIO was a branch of the NSA, the National Security Agency here within the United States. They actually started in the late 1950s doing contact and communication with the ET races and predominantly the Anunnaki. In the mid-1960s, a young man became the head of the ACIO, and his name was A.R. Borden. Borden was a genius. In fact, the Anunnaki considered him the most bright and intelligent man on this planet. And that's why they wanted him, and they wanted him to be the one that they would communicate with. Because see, they weren't really interested in political leaders like Obama and Putin. These are political leaders that are here today, gone tomorrow, and they have political agendas. When you can work with a brilliant scientist, they could work with him what they knew for about 30 to 40 years, and they did. Borden was in contact, working with the Anunnaki for close to 40 years. Then the third source of what I call core source information are the Nephilim themselves, the Anunnaki hybrids, and Michael Lee is one. And as I have said, his statement on that and the clarification on that is based upon his blood, which is extremely rare, and it has been tested by Harvard medical professors to confirm that. And the second thing is his DNA. With that, he is one who is in touch with them. He communicates with them. But not only that, for the last 5 years of Borden's life, Borden took Michael Lee and brought him underneath his wings and began to tutor him. So Michael Lee worked directly with A.R. Borden for 5 years. So obviously you would have all three of these sources that would be excellent core sources of information. I'm in touch. I communicate on a regular basis with Dr. Sasha Lessin and his wife Janet. I have access to the writings of A.R. Borden that have never been released to the public. And I'm personal friends with Michael Lee Hill, who worked with Borden for 5 years, and he himself is a Nephilim. That's about as good as you can get at core source information. And that's why that both Michael and I believe that this radio program that you're going to listen to is going to be one of the best sources of information at understanding the role of the Anunnaki, who they are, why they are here, and how they work with us as a human race. You'll enjoy the radio program.
I've got Michael Lee Hill here with me. But before I introduce Michael, I want to say, Blanca, thank you very much for joining us here tonight. Where you are clear on the other side of the United States in Atlanta. How are you doing tonight?
That's right. Over here in Atlanta, Georgia, doing terrific. We had very nice weather here, and I'm also looking forward to the conversation with Michael Lee Hill. Always has great information, and I think our listeners are going to appreciate his point of view on this very interesting topic.
Well, it was interesting as today, as I had a person, send me an email and says, well, Dave, I don't think you really know what you're talking about in the Anunnaki. There's all kinds of different stuff. And I politely sent an email back to him. I said, everybody has an opinion. But the real issue is, what's the source of your information of the position that you are taking? I don't think you are what is called an original source, that you're not a scholar. You haven't studied these extensively. You're not a professional in the field. So you're picking up your information from either somebody else that you have read or some other video that you have watched. So how well qualified is your source to be making those statements? And then I use what is called a quality source, and that's a term that I use. A quality source is usually a source that they are some of the best scholars in the world at what they've done. They've dedicated their lifetime to this type of research and work, or they are a quality source because they have first-hand information and experience. And when I've had, Dr. Sasha Lessin and his wife Janet on my radio program, they're probably some of the best scholars in the world on the ancient Sumerian manuscripts. And they were students of Zecharia Sitchin. And Zecharia Sitchin did pass his baton on to Sasha and Janet Lessin. And you may not always agree with Zecharia Sitchin, but the bottom line is the man was almost a genius, and nobody can hold a candle to him on this planet of the scholarly research and work that he had done around the ancient Sumerian tablets that talks about the Anunnaki. And then from there, you go into what are experiential sources. Well, tonight, my guest, and he's sitting right here beside me, and we're getting to spend the whole week together. Michael is here with me the whole week here this week. My guest tonight, you've heard him on my radio program before, is Michael Lee Hill. And as you know, that Michael is what is called a Nephilim. He is a human Anunnaki hybrid, and this isn't something that he just goes around calling himself. It's based literally on the blood test that he has done by some of the best Harvard medical professors have tested his blood and to say, dude, you're it. You're not even human. We don't even know where to put you into a category. So with that, folks, I want to introduce you tonight to my absolutely wonderful friend, Michael Lee Hill. Michael, welcome to the program tonight.
Thanks, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So tell us, let's do this. I'm wanting, first of all, because how we're sitting here tonight, I got to pay a little more closer attention to my computer, but because I'm kind of turning my back to it as Michael and I are sitting around this wonderful Blue Yeti microphone. But Michael, let's do this. Why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of a background and history about yourself, and to what basically substantiates when I say that you are a quality source because of your personal life experience. Tell us how you got into this.
Well, I live very close to Lake Erie, and what had happened was around 2005, I started seeing all these craft out over Lake Erie, and I live very close to the lake. And I used, I had a Sony digital handy cam. Didn't really use it for anything, but I thought, I'm going to start finding out where some beaches were that I could go down, hang out around sunset. And I was ready. I had a tripod and had the camera, waiting. And if a big ball light went by, I was ready to film it. And what had happened was I started to accumulate quite a library. And I will share this story because I thought it was pretty funny. One night I had, this Sony digital handycam. It recorded on digital 8mm tape, and each one at the highest resolution, it was 1 hour per tape. So I brought 2 tapes down, and it was just one of those nights that had crazy activity. So I had filled up both tapes, didn't have another tape, so I put my camera away, and I was just sitting there, and I was kind of freaked out by what I had captured on film. And the thought occurred to me, I really wonder if they want me to release this stuff. And this next thought occurred to me, well, why don't you just ask them? You're down there by yourself. There's no one else around. So out loud, verbally, I said, listen, I got some really crazy footage here. So if you don't want me to release this to the world, you need to do something. Show up, make it so it's not even debatable. And if you show up within the next 5 minutes, I absolutely will not ever share this with YouTube or, to the world. And I wouldn't have. So I sat there, about 5 minutes had passed, not even a little sparkle out there over the lake. And about another 5 minutes went by. And like I said, this night was just filled with activity. So to have 10 minutes of absolute nothing was really kind of odd for this night. And I knew that was their sign, because I asked them, if you show up and do something, then I won't release it. Well, at that point, cool, let's celebrate. And sometimes I do bring a little beer down there to the lake. So I cracked open a beer, and all of a sudden, probably some of the craziest stuff I've ever seen over the lake happened. A whole mothership, orbs that were about 2 football field lengths apart from one another, that had probably hundreds of smaller orbs of light between them. And it looked like it was teeter-tottering in the sky, and these lights were pulsing back and forth between the 2 larger orbs that were on each end. And it just blew my mind what I was seeing. And all of a sudden, these smaller orbs of light started dropping out of it, and they would go down and take 90-degree turns. And there was 2 at a time. They'd drop down, and then one would go to the left and one would go to the right. And I'd say about 6 pairs of those, so 12 orbs came out of this large teeter-tottering mothership. And, they let me know they wanted to celebrate, And so that's when I decided, well, cool, I'm going to put this stuff on YouTube. And before I knew it, some of the footage had went viral. And if anyone wants to see any of this, you can see it with your own 2 eyes. My YouTube channel is Frozen Hill, all one word. And when you check out my channel, you'll see it's about I think it's over 4.5 million views now. And because of that, that's what brought the History Channel to my door. And to make a long story short, they were just doing an interview, another contactee. His name was Terrell Copeland. And he had filmed the exact same orbs of light as I had. He had the same story of contact, same spiritual message given to him that I had received about how thoughts create reality, and think about what you're thinking about and becoming responsible for your own mental energy. And but here's the deal. He was a Marine, and he was getting sent overseas, and because of this, they're doing a really thorough medical test, and they had found that he had an unknown blood anomaly. And so when they came to film me 2 weeks later, they realized 500 miles, apart from Terrell Copeland, we've never met. And here we had the same craft on film, same message, same story, But they thought, well, wouldn't it be weird then if I ended up with that same blood anomaly? So they asked me if I'd be willing to go to Boston to have an update to my story. And at this point, I was really kind of confused. I said, sure, right, what I went to Boston for. And that's when I found out that they were taking us to the hospital there to have our blood work done by a Harvard professor. His name was David Systrom. And the end of that production schedule is when they told me the last day I was there, they actually filmed in a lobby in the hospital, and the doctor came in, and sure enough, I had the exact same blood anomaly. And at this point, it was strange because right after they let us know this, the doctor and whatnot, I was told my plane was waiting for me, and the cab was down there to take me back to the airport. And I was like, wait a minute, this isn't a TV show anymore to me. You just told me I don't have normal human blood. Is there something I need to be worried about? And the doctor, he said, what do you think unknown means? He was actually kind of not nice about it. I was like, well, is there a problem? He said, if I were you, look into seeing my own private doctor and see what they could figure out. And I was put on a plane back home. That's what sparked the next. By the way, that episode is available on YouTube. It was on the History Channel's UFO Hunters, and the episode is called Alien Contact. So your listeners can go and they can see they filmed us, being poked and prodded, which was really a test for me because I have almost a phobia when it comes to needles. And I wasn't real happy about having a needle stuck in me, but it is on YouTube. You can check it out. That aired in March of 2008, and that's what sparked this contact in the summer of 2008. I was invited to attend this festival that was in New York. It was called Sirius Rising, and I was approached by some beings there who announced themselves to me. They said, we've been known in your past as the Anunnaki. And at this point, there was no ancient aliens on TV. I didn't even know what an Anunnaki was. And they went on to say, we're here to talk to you about this blood anomaly that was revealed on the History Channel. They told me that I was a part of their hybrid bloodline on this planet that was known as the Nephilim. And I said, well, I don't know anything about any of this. And they said, we know, but you will. And that sparked my first meeting with the Anunnaki. And that's pretty much in a nutshell of how all this came to be. It was, first of all, contact with them. Matter of fact, when I did meet them in New York, they said, we've heard that you've been filming us over Lake Erie. I was like, well, I guess so, That'll do for a nutshell of how this all began.
You ended up finding that you had this extremely rare blood anomaly, and you have explained to others what it really is that you have an extremely high amount of creatine kinase within your blood.
Kinase, yes.
The average normal person has about 25 parts per liter. You have 2,100 per liter.
Yeah.
And what that means is that you carry an extremely high amount of oxygen within your blood, and also means that you can carry a very, very high amount of electrical or chi energy in your body. Mm-hmm. And now I've shared this with a few other people. You and I haven't talked about this, but I use this as an illustration. It's almost like if they came up to you and hit you with with the taser, it would just tingle for you. It wouldn't even put you down because your body can handle all of that energy. Is that right? That's kind of like what it would be similar to?
Yeah, well, if you look into what creatine kinase does in our bodies, just period, once, like you said, the normal levels are about 25 parts per liter of blood. But if you've had a heart attack or you've ripped a muscle or damaged, your body, maybe working out or something, you've ripped the muscle, what will happen is your brain will start pumping out more creatine kinase up to about 300 parts per liter of blood, they told me is about tops. And what that does is the creatine kinase brings extra oxygen into the bloodstream to facilitate healing. And what I've found out now is that the more oxygen in the blood equates how much electrical capacitance you're holding at a cellular level. And so, yeah, it can be considered chi or prana, life force. So if the oxygen, really what they said was my levels of 2100, what's really happening is my body's bringing in a whole lot of extra chi or prana. We'll get into why that is an indicator of the Nephilim as well, because they've told me all this.
Now, it was interesting because this happened to you 8 years ago, and you had absolutely no idea what an Anunnaki was. You'd never even heard of them. And, Ancient Aliens, it wasn't out. There wasn't hardly any books on the subject. And if you even started doing some search on the internet, you didn't really find that much.
Well, I'll tell you, I got home and, I was pretty computer savvy anyhow. And I really started trying to do some Google, research. And there was very little out there. It was... I was looking, but at this very same time, I had come in contact with A.R. Borden, which we will get into. And I remember when I got back from that first meeting with the Anunnaki, here, just so your listeners know, this gentleman was the head of the remote viewers reverse engineering division of the NSA. And I didn't know this, but they had already been working with the Anunnaki since 1952 in behind-the-scenes reverse engineering programs. And so when I got home, I was like, have you ever heard of the Anunnaki? And, it's kind of funny now looking back. But well,
let's do this. Let's introduce also who A.R. Borden is, because that's such a key part of this whole story and for where you are. And you said it goes all the way back to 1952.
Eisenhower.
The Eisenhower administration. A.R. Borden was considered to be one of the most brilliant scientists on the planet. He was basically, we would call a super genius. And he was so bright that he was brought into the NSA as a very, very young man. And by the time, and then a branch of the NSA was called ACIO, Advanced Contact Intelligence Organization. It was the branch of the NSA that would basically do the research and the contacts with ET's alien beings and all the technology around all their starships and everything. And Borden was probably only about 25 or 26 years old when he became the director of ACIO. And he had been there for almost 40 years as the director of the ACIO. And for 40 years, he was the one person on this planet, and this was in his own words, he was the one person on this planet that the Anunnaki wanted to communicate with. They didn't care about communicating with presidents and kings and Obamas and Putins because they're just politicians that are here today and gone tomorrow. But they wanted to talk with these absolutely bright scientists because they know that they could pass on certain technology and that they could understand what was there. So here you have the individual that had been in contact, communicating with them, learning from them, receiving their technology, and we were reverse engineering their starships. A lot of the technology we have today of computers came through the Anunnaki, and it came through Borden's communication with them. So this would be the absolute top number one source on this planet of understanding the Anunnaki. And he contacts you.
Yeah.
And not only does he contact you, for 5 years, he kind of took you underneath his wings and was almost kind of, he was teaching you and developing you, and was almost kind of like an adopted son that you had been to him. Now, Borden died 3 years ago. And so when I say that we talk about this as what is called qualitative sources, is because here you have, and so not only did Michael have a face-to-face meeting with the Anunnaki, and they said, you are one of us, you are a Nephilim, and then A.R. Borden reaches out to him. Here's the man who has been in touch with the Anunnaki for 40 years and said, and he confirmed, yes, you are. That's why I am approaching you, why I want you to be a part of us here. And you had actually come into their group, and they had a subgroup of the ACIO that was called the Labyrinth Group.
Yes.
And in the Labyrinth Group, there were 12. I think you said there were 12 of you that were Nephilim. that they had confirmed that had these extremely rare bloods, high amounts of creatine kinase. And I think didn't you say there was about 30 or 40 different people that were a part of the labyrinth group? Was that right?
Yeah, they said that the 12 members, my levels of 2100 at that time would have put me about in the middle of those 12, with the highest member being 12,000. And they had told me that, you know, he had been hit by a particle beam weapon and pretty much got up and dusted himself off, with the connotation being most people wouldn't have got back up, you know, because like you said, this extra oxygen is, you know, if it's released into the body to heal anyhow, then, you know, my body heals really quick.
Right. So now the reason I'm saying that is because right now, if you do research on the internet, you are going to find all kinds of stuff about the Anunnaki. There are tons of YouTube videos out there. And most of what is out there puts the Anunnaki in what I would call is a dark light, in a negative perspective. And that brings up a lot of issues, because what happens is people, they go on to, they see this, they read it, they watch it, and say, well, that's it. It's got to be that way. And they don't, their information isn't coming from good quality sources, such as A.R. Borden and, you know, Michael Lee Hill and Janet and Sasha Lesson. I mean, they are some of your best qualitative sources of truly understanding who is the Anunnaki and what they are like. Now, Michael, let's go on. And as I've said, most people put them into a negative light. Well, who are they? You do have to go back and you can do your research. You can read a lot of Sitchin's books. They are an ancient ET race that came here to the Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago to mine the gold. They are multidimensional in how they have come to us and they approach to us, which means they have the ability to move in and out of different dimensions of energy. They have the ability to cloak themselves so that we don't even see it, and they aren't limited by the density of physical bodies as we are, but yet the vast majority of them look just like us. In fact, you had given me I think it was Sasha Lesson had given me a picture of what was called the Nordic Anunnakis, and they look just exactly like us as humans. In fact, we are pretty much patterned after them, except for the fact that the vast majority of them are very tall. Mm-hmm. They're usually between 9 and 12 feet tall is what they are, and they're very large. Most of your ancient Egyptian pharaohs, a lot of them were Anunnaki. And if you look at some of the ancient Egyptian paintings and the hieroglyphics that are there, they're sitting down, but if you took them and positioned them standing up, you could see that they would be 9 to 10 feet tall. You see them, you know, with basically small humans on their laps that are just half their own size, you know, and stuff like that. So you see a lot of that coming out of that. And that is the history that has been kept from us and has been hidden from us. But the true history is now starting to come out, because a lot of the good research that is coming out of the archaeological studies, predominantly from the ancient Sumerian tablets, is just coming out in the last 20 and 30 years. And it's just now starting to make its way into the public spectrum. It still really hasn't made its way into the universities yet, because they don't want to have to admit that they've been wrong for this 100+ years of what they've been teaching us, but yet it's staring them right in the face and they can't deny it. So, Michael, let's go on. Let's talk a little bit more then about how you understand the Anunnaki. And you use this term good cop, bad cop. Tell us about that.
Well, I think, you know, for your listeners that have no idea about the history of the Anunnaki, maybe we should just talk about who the Anunnaki are and some of the main, I don't want to call them characters, you know, but the names that are going to be coming up here. The Anunnaki are truly, their planet is called Nibiru, but I want to say right off the bat that that's our name for their planet. It means a planet of crossing, and our word for them is Anunnaki, which means those from the heavens that came down to Earth, or, you know, different variations of that. But that's our words for them. They call their planet the Sa'amai, and the people of the Sa'amai are Sa'am, and then Sa'am translated into our language is Sam. So when you're dealing with people on the inside, like, A.R. Borden's group and stuff, they refer to them as Sam, not Anunnaki. But I'm not going to call them Sam tonight because no one would understand who I was talking about anyhow. But the Anunnaki, their planet is a part of our solar system. And a matter of fact, the reality of this was just revealed to the masses just this year. Your listeners can go. Maybe many people are aware of this, but it was revealed through like NASA, Space.com, and mass media, CNN, MSNBC, that scientists have discovered that there's another planet that's in our solar system that takes a very long orbit out into deep outer space and orbits around a dark star. Because what they're finding out is every solar system is a binary star system. It's just how the physics of our reality work. But as people know, all stars go through cycles. It can turn into black holes and, dark stars and whatnot. So our binary twin to our system has went dark long ago, but the mass is still there. So there's only one planet that would travel into deep outer space and come back through our part of the solar system every 3,600 years, is what the Sumerian tablets say about its orbit. So just go in, type in Google 2016 January Planet X discovered, and you'll see that this is absolutely a reality. So this planet comes through, and what would happen was it's inhabited. There was a group of beings that called this planet home, and the king of that planet, his name was Anu, A-N-U. And what's interesting with this story is, a lot of people, first of all, I guess, one good thing that I'm really proud to get into tonight is to try to clear up some of these misconceptions. Because right off the bat, many people think the Anunnaki is just one bloodline. It's one race. And really what you find out is there's two totally different bloodlines that run through the Anunnaki. And the reason for this is the king of Nibiru, Anu, had taken on a non-Anunnaki female who was of what we would refer to as the Elohim or the Wingmakers race of extraterrestrials. And actually, this race had a lot more life experience, if you want to look at it that way. They were older and went through a lot more learning than the Anunnaki themselves. And Anu had taken on this Elohim female, and they had produced a son, and his name was Ea. And so Ea, for the first time ever in the Anunnaki family tree, there's new blood, new DNA coming into the Anunnaki through Anu's partnership with this Elohim female and their firstborn son, Ea. And Ea became known as Enki. And I guess we should clear this up too. Enki is not a name, it's a title. It's kind of like the Dalai Lama isn't a name, it's a title. En means Lord, Kai means earth. So Enki is Lord of the earth. His name was Ea. And so what happened was, just like a lot of cultures that we know of, Enki was prince. He was the son of the king, groomed into that position. But further on down the timeline, he severed that relationship with the Elohim female and took on an Anunnaki wife. And they had another son, and he was known as Enlil. It would have been Enki's younger brother. But with the succession of kingship rules of the Anunnaki, a pureblood got the throne over a half-blood. So instead of Enki getting the throne went to his younger brother Enlil, which became, Enlil was known as Yahweh of the Bible. We can get into that, but he didn't look favorably upon what had happened down the timeline. We'll get into that, why Homo sapien was even created. But so what you got is this cast of beings that we're going to be talking about, Anu, Enki, and Enlil, but really more specifically from this point forward, it deals with Enki and Enlil. But why were they even here? It was because they used gold. It wasn't for currency or anything, actually. It's just, gold is one of the best conductors of electricity. That's why, a lot of really high-end stereo equipment has gold connectors and whatnot. So what had happened was, first of all, they took gold and powderized it and put it into what they call monatomic gold. And they would either inhale it or they would put it into a liquid form, and it made their DNA fire on all cylinders. And that's why part of the reason why they had such long lives is because of this technology that they had to take gold and put it into a monatomic form and take it into their bodies. And not only that, they would powderize it and put it into a really fine powder to put into their atmosphere because it shielded their planet from the solar radiation from our sun when it came through our part of the solar system. And it also kept some of the heat around their planet when it traveled into deep outer space to orbit around the dark star. And this was a do or die situation because through their own evolution of their planet, they kind of did what we did and kind of screwed up their ozone. And it was a do or die situation for them to get gold and mix it with other substances to put into their atmosphere. And to me, it does kind of sound like chemtrails, doesn't it? I'm like, oh, whose technology really is this? Because, it's really interesting. I'm not, I don't want to be a pro chemtrail guy here, but, when you find out that our solar activity right now is off the charts. NASA revealed, I believe it was 2014, that back in 2012, we almost had a doomsday event where a huge chunk of the sun came off in a solar flare, and thank God it was pointed in another direction. But if it would have been pointed at us, it would have boiled the oceans right off this planet. And but I think we're getting some help. But so as they came through our part of the solar system, they seen that the Earth had these large deposits of gold available. And so they set up mining operations, like you said, I think it was about 400,000 years ago, to mine gold on this planet so they could use it and put it into monatomic form and put it up in their atmosphere. So, but what we need to get into is the reason of the creation of Homo sapien. And, what this gets into is the Anunnaki who came here that were working in the gold mines here on planet Earth, they became known as the Anunnaki heroes. And this was because we need to get into a little physics here. Some of your listeners might be familiar with Einstein's twins paradox. What that was Einstein said the faster we travel through the ether, our perception of time physically does change. And his paradox was that if you took two twins and one twin got in his spaceship and traveled even near the speed of light for, say, 5 years, when he came back to planet Earth, he would find out that his brother had been dead 500 years ago. And what's really strange, though, is this, as crazy as this sounds to, our brains now, they know that if you take an atomic clock and put it on an airplane, a jet, and have a ground-based atomic clock, the jet's only flying a few hundred miles faster than its ground-based counterpart. When the jet lands, those two atomic clocks will be a few milliseconds off. So when you take this into account with the two twins paradox theory, what you need to realize is to each twin, the twin in the spaceship, his wristwatch is still clicking 1 second equals 1 second. His brother that was back on planet Earth, his wristwatch is clicking 1 second to 1 second. There's no problem until they try to come back into each other's timelines that a problem exists. So take this idea that traveling faster through the ether changes your perception of time. Well, all of our planets have different speeds traveling through the ether in their orbital paths around the sun, which means every planet that you go to, time will be experienced differently. What's cool is this concept was actually covered in Matthew McConaughey, his new movie Interstellar, where it really got into that, if you go down to this planet and its gravity is different and its travel through the solar system is different, that, one day down there might equal a month or a year, up if you're up in space. And so what happened was they were called the Anunnaki heroes, the miners here, because they started to begin to look at this as a death sentence. Because once they came here to mine gold and they returned back home to Nibiru, their loved ones had aged at a different rate. And not only that, it was not cushy work, And so the miners, the Anunnaki miners, the heroes, began to go on strike. And they, didn't want to do this work, didn't want to come here, and it was a do or die situation for them. So King Anu was getting troops ready to come here and take out the heroes. It was like, pretty much you don't want to go on strike. A lot of leaders aren't going to look at that favorably. And so it got to be a really problem because, there's going to be civil war within their own race. And it was really important for them to get this gold. And it was Enki, Anu's firstborn son, that came up with a solution. He said, there's no life form on this planet at this point that could help us with this toil and labor, because, Homo sapien at that point was a primate that was around the evolutionary phase of a chimpanzee. And this is not derogatory because all life forms go through these evolutionary phases. It just so happened that's where we were on the planet at that time. And as much as you might love a chimpanzee, try to get one to help you, with the labor of mining gold. Good luck with that. So Enki said, what if we took this primate and tweaked and put in our own genetics, our own DNA, and made a hybrid that was more self-conscious and more aware that could actually help us with this toil and labor. And see, this is the first misconception because a lot of people want to put the Anunnaki into this race that just goes around creating slave labor. That's not the case. It was a do or die situation for them. It wasn't like that's just something they go around doing. And so that's what happened. That was the creation of Homo sapien. Enki was the scientist and his sister that did the actual work to genetically tweak this primate and increase its consciousness. And that's why they say, where's the missing link? There is no missing link. We came right out of the gate in Sumeria with full functioning. Well, long before that, actually. Sumeria is down the timeline. But so that's the first misconception that I want to talk about, that this isn't a race that just goes around creating slave labor. Matter of fact, in the Sumerian tablets, when the human being was created, it was brought into their word for the land here was Eden. And the first male, his name was Adam or Adamu. And I was thinking, boy, this stuff sounds really familiar,
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter was when we think of Eden and of, being in a Edenic lifestyle, it's, that's what we were. We were more like pampered pets, that we had everything taken care of for us. There was no starvation, no homeless. If you wanted to go meet an Anunnaki, you went into the pyramid, like you said, and you could go and gain wisdom and whatnot. We were much more like pampered pets than slave labor. But this is going to get into the second misconception, which is what happened was, once humankind was brought into Eden and started to multiply, it got to the point where there was 400 million humans on planet Earth, and everything was going pretty smooth. The mining operations were going smooth. They avoided civil war, and everything was hunky-dory. But all of a sudden, the Anunnaki scientists realized that the Earth was going to have this massive Earth change, which is called a pole shift or crustal displacement. People can look into a book called The Path of the Pole by Charles Hapgood, and it had a preface by Albert Einstein. He said it's just physics. Our planet is off axis, it's tilted, and these ice caps are reaching maturity at the top and bottom of the planet, but they're not right on the top and bottom because we're tilted. And it's just physics. They want to relocate to the equator. And when it happens, it pulls the crust with it. And you can imagine, it's not that the Earth turns over, because the crust is only, about 30 miles thick. Mm-hmm. And it's almost picture in orange, and the peel is going to slip around the inner pulp. And but you can imagine, if it happens in free fall speed, it said that the ice caps are going to relocate to the equator in about 8 hours. Well, that's the speed of jet flies. It said this is what happened. Actually, a lot of people know that woolly mammoths have been found with fresh vegetation, still, flowers and stuff in their throats and in their stomachs. Said that they weren't truly cold weather animals. They were eating, grazing, and all of a sudden they got slammed to the ground and flash frozen because the atmosphere, gets ripped off the planet when this happens. And so the misconception is, a lot of people say the Anunnaki, or in the Bible it says, God wanted to wipe out the Nephilim and all this, which we'll get into that, what happened there. But that's really not the case. If you go back to the original Sumerian clay tablets, it states this was a cyclical event. It's happened many times in the past. It'll happen many times in the future. It's not God punishing us. It's not the Anunnaki punishing us. So that's another misconception that I wanted to clear up. It's not like they just wanted to wipe out mankind. But what had happened was, because of Enlil getting the throne, as the story goes, Enlil didn't look very favorably upon mankind, and he became like the Yahweh of the Bible that was, didn't look favorably upon man and was vengeful and, not real compassionate. So he puts out the word. He said, well, it must be God's will. I don't like him anyhow. Let him perish. He was the king. So, people followed in line and followed his orders. And he told the Anunnaki, do not tell the humans this is going to happen. Why invoke fear and panic into this? So we're going to keep it to ourselves. When this happens, we'll just exodus off this planet and leave them to God's fate. And what you find out is, back in Sumeria, anytime you see Enki, he's depicted as a water bearer. He'll either have water erupting from his shoulders, or he'll be carrying buckets or pitchers of water. The water almost symbolizes divine light, truth, and here's another thing, a lot of people are going, how come these Anunnaki are carrying around these bags or purses? Or they're not. It's pitchers of water. And, Enki was the man holding a bucket of water. Well, that's Aquarius. So now the age of Aquarius truly is the age of Enki. But because of him being the water bearer, Enlil says to him, well, why keep all these fish in the ocean to help feed humanity when they're going to perish anyhow? Let's remove a lot of the fish for our own sustenance, and we can eat the fish and send it back to Nibiru or whatnot. So he tasked Inky to go out over the oceans and to remove the fish. And, I really look at this as Inky's ascension, during this phase, because it was kind of unheard of for one of them to disobey the king. Because, picture a worker bee, no, I'm not doing that to the king or queen, Inky went out and he couldn't find himself to do what he was tasked to do, which was remove the fish from the oceans, because he viewed us as family. It was his own genetics and his own DNA that he mixed with, this indigenous primate and created Homo sapien. So what happened was, instead of him following orders, he went against his own race. And as I said, his mother was not Anunnaki. He went to the Elohim. He went to his mother's side. And he said, isn't there anything that can be done? My race is going to let this beautiful race that has so much potential just perish and not lift a finger to try to help. And so they think tanked it, and they said, well, what can we do? And so Inky had this idea that has been known as the Ark, Noah's flood myth. And so the elder said, well, even if we do this experiment of yours and create this Ark to save humanity, and it wasn't two of every animal, by the way, it was a DNA library. And they said, well, if we do this, will this upcoming species, Homo sapien, evolve to the point necessary at the end of this grand cycle, which was December 21st, 2012? And the answer was no, because we were truly in Eden. And we had everything taken care of for us. We had no catalyst for change. We were stagnant. We were not evolving fast enough. And they said, well, if they're not going to evolve and work through their shadow self-work as a species quick enough to be ready for this dimensional shift, which I can get into that too. What it is they say that, your listeners are probably going to be pretty hip to the idea that thoughts create reality. But think of the Earth's magnetic field as the glue. The stronger the magnetic field of the Earth, the more of a time lag there is between the thought and the manifestation of the thought. And the two have to be energetically the same for it to manifest then. So say you put out some really ugly thought forms, someone makes you mad, and you put out some negativity. And then, the next day or two, you don't feel the same, and you wish you didn't do that. Well, when that comes time, that time lag between the thought and the manifestation of the thought, it won't manifest. But the lesser the magnetic field of the Earth, the lesser time lag there is between the thought and the manifestation of the thought, until, when the magnetic field reaches zero, there is no time lag. So you can imagine, if you haven't worked through your shadow work and haven't done your spiritual homework and weeded the fear and doubt and, those kind of dark thought forms from your own belief system, they're just going to manifest instantly. There's going to be no time for you to change your mind. And they use their advanced remote viewing technology to look into the future. I'm talking about the Anunnaki now. And, the elder said they're not going to evolve fast enough and work through their shadow work to be ready for this. So why even do this Ark experiment of yours? And so then they had to think tank it again and say, Inky came up with the idea. He said, what if we made them experience their own mental energy in an accelerated fashion? What if we made them unbiasedly experience their own mental energy, light or dark, reflected back, and maybe they'll evolve faster and work through this? Well, the elder said, well, that's really interesting, but you just can't do that. It's never been tried before, and I want to say this as well, because this is truly duality. It is bringing, or free will even, because if you really start to think about this and you understand thoughts create reality, you have no more free will. There's only one thought form that is the most love-filled outcome for everyone involved, And any other thought form is a trip back into the Maya, or the illusion. And so you have no free will. And that's God's will. The most love-filled, path of true evolution for life is going to be the Creator's will. And so at this point, they said you can't just do that. You can't make an evolving race experience its own mental energy in an accelerated fashion. If it's never been done before, you are going to have to incarnate as human and walk a mile in their moccasins, so to speak, and try to guide this experiment in bringing duality and this experiment to make us experience our own mental energy in an accelerated fashion. You're going to have to become human and steer it from the inside, so to speak, or under the radar. And so, Inky had went this far anyhow, so of course he said, sure. But what had happened is when they tried to incarnate into the human vessel, they would spontaneously combust because the human vessel wasn't capable of handling their higher level of energetics. So then they thought, well, that didn't work out real well. Bursting into flames isn't real fun. And so they thought, well, what can we do? And they think tanked it again. And they thought, what if we made an offshoot of the Homo sapien that had more chi or more prana or life force available? And this was the creation of the Nephilim. And that's what was revealed on the History Channel. It is creatine kinase. And the Harvard professor said if he had to guess, it would be some type of virus that was unknown to mankind. And he said not all viruses are bad. They actually can work at the level of DNA. Let me grab a sip of tea here. Hang on. He said, and that's what I found out from A.R. Borden's group and stuff too. He said it truly is an extraterrestrial virus that tricks the brain into releasing these massive amounts of creatine kinase, which brings extra chi, and then they could incarnate. And but I'll tell you what, I still run really hot. I actually had a Shinto priest recently. His name was Hideo, and he taught me how to reduce my body temperature when I get too much chi flowing, But and I want to say too, because this is important of what we're going to get into, is Edgar Cayce. People know that he got into, the Atlanteans, the Hall of Records being under the Sphinx, all these readings that dealt with Atlantis. He said that Atlantis didn't go in one huge earth change. It was about 52,000 years ago was the first earth change, and some of the Atlanteans went to the right. And by the way, Atlantis was right between the North American continent and the European continent. So they just went to the right, and then 27,000 years ago was the biblical flood event. And some more of them left Atlantis and went to the right into the European continent. And then 10,500 years ago was the final event, and I believe that one was an asteroid or meteorite impact that took out the remaining continent of Atlantis. But this time, for the first time, is when the Atlanteans went to the left, and they came up into the bottom of the North American continent. And the first indigenous people they met were the Mayans. They taught them the Mayan calendar, pyramid building, so Quetzalcoatl, right? That, they even said, hey, some big white guy showed up, and taught us all this. It's in their own history. But I want to back up now, because the biblical flood that we're talking about is the time frame that they decided to create this Nephilim offshoot of the Homo sapiens so they could incarnate and try to steer us into the higher realms. But here's where we get into good cop, bad cop, because the Anunnaki understand thoughts have an electromagnetic reality. We're beaming. Our thoughts have frequency. We can't detect it with our technology now, but we will soon. But, thoughts of fear and doubt and things that go against the life flow, the, evolution, they have lower frequency, lower geometry attached to the waveform. And thoughts of love and thoughts that go along with creation and evolution have higher frequency. And this is actually provable now with, the work of Dr. Emoto. I think a lot of people will understand that. But, no one's really asked the question, well, how do you transmute? Because, what we're saying is energy can't be created or destroyed. That's just, our scientists know that now. It has to be transmuted. So how do you transmute a negative thought form? Well, you live it. It comes up in your own personal reality. And if you can choose love over fear, then you'll transmute those negative thought forms into their higher octave. But if you don't, then the same exact experiences keep coming up over and over again. It'll be different people, but it's the same experience. And you might ask yourself, how come the same stuff keeps happening to me over and over and over again? Well, it's because you haven't transmuted those dark thought forms. So they thought, well, if we're going to make mankind experience its own mental energy in an accelerated fashion, let's separate into two different factions. One faction will scan the mass consciousness, and if they sense someone emitting fear, they'll come in and make sure you get a chance to experience your own dark thought forms in hopes you'll change it. You'll choose love and transmute those energies. And but this other faction would come in and reflect back a positive polarity, and they would inspire humanity into the higher realms and sacred geometry and music and, culture and art and music. And so I call these two factions Team Good Cop and Team Bad Cop. And this experiment of Good Cop, Bad Cop, accelerating human conscious evolution, and the Nephilim was 27,000 years ago, so we can put it as a timeline. And look, is that a good pause?
It is. And you can, and then let me take it from here for just a little bit, because Michael, that was absolutely excellent. See, you touched on this whole concept of good cop, bad cop. And what you're saying is that the Anunnaki were so advanced in understanding human thoughts and the projection of mental energy, and they knew that we were coming to the point of this flood to survive, but no more than that, they also could look out and they could see the 2012 transition, and they were seeing that 29,000 years out, and says, are we going to make it through this transition? And they said at that time, no. We, as a human race, would end up, because of our dark mental energy that we have, we would basically blow ourselves off the planet. We would come up, like what they said, the nuclear energy, and we would blow ourselves up. We would totally wipe ourselves out and kill and obliterate ourselves. But to make it through that time frame, they said, let's put them on an accelerated, what we would call enlightenment or ascension or evolving growth process. And to do that, you have to transmute your own dark mental energy. Yeah. And what would be forms of dark mental energy? Anger, hatred, division, racism, killing, warring, fear, greed, me, I'm more important than you. All of that are forms of what is called duality consciousness. And another term is what is called the separation. I am different from you, I am separate from you, and I have to make myself be better than you. Now, when we read through Sitchin's book and we see a lot of the activity of the Anunnaki, we see these behaviors of warring and killing and one-upsmanship and power and greed and etc. And I am better than you and I will kill you and get rid of you. And so what happens is we read that, and then a lot of people say that's the Anunnaki, and then they then project out there in the Anunnaki that they are a bad, evil, dark, reptilian race that we have to be in opposition to, when really all they are really doing is reflecting back to us our own subconscious thoughts.
Yeah, our own shadow.
Our own shadows. And these aren't your conscious thoughts. These are your subconscious thoughts. Here's what's really interesting of something that came out of, the scientists there of ACIO. They had understood that the conscious mind only processes 15 to 20 data bits of information per second. But the subconscious mind produces somewhere between 40 and 80 million of data bits of information per second. So at the subconscious level is everything that you have ever done, every life you have ever lived, every emotion that you have ever experienced, every experience that you have ever gone through. It's all there, and it's constantly processing all of this. And at that base core in your subconscious, if you've got dark thoughts, dense thoughts, evil thoughts, anger, I'm going to kill, I'm better than you, I need to be more important than you, at some point in time, we have to transmute that energy. And so when you take an Anunnaki, and I don't care if it's an Anunnaki, I don't care if it's a politician, I don't care if it's what we would see as being presented to us by the Muslim world of all these horrible Muslims who are killing and raping. If you see them as being evil, all that's really happening is it's a mirror of what's happening inside of you.
Absolutely.
That's all that it is. And then so the Anunnaki step in and play the role of bad cop to reflect back to us our own dark energy so that we will say, wait a minute, I don't want to be that way. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be hateful. I don't want to be warring. I don't want to be greedy. I want to be loving and caring and compassionate and filled with mercy. And that is how you transmute that thought. So they play the bad cop role, so reflect it back to us. So we will evolve through a fast enough process to make it through the 2012 shift. And we've made it through that 2012 shift.
Indeed.
And so that is why quite often the Anunnaki are portrayed as the bad guys, the reptilian race, the evil ones, when all they have been doing, because they are multidimensional, they can take on any form that they want to, and they can make us see whatever it is, and all they're doing is letting us see what's already going on within our own subconscious mind.
Yeah.
So there you had what was called the bad cop. But also in the Anunnaki is the good cop role.
Yeah, and that's what I see so many researchers. And let me add, because you're absolutely right, but think about a human that has a lot of fear and doubt and darkness within their belief system, and you're catering to a multidimensional being whose spiritual job it is to reflect back your own dark thought forms. You're going to say demon. You're going to go, because they're making you multidimensionally experience your own dark thought forms in hopes that you'll change it, but I can see why if you just focus on Team Bad Cop, it's going to be scary.
Yes.
And I think this explains very well too why, you'll talk to someone and they'll be like, well, the Anunnaki has guided mankind and they've given us agriculture and architecture and sacred geometry and music, and they've helped us flourish. And then the next person you talk to, and they'll be like, they're the ones behind all the world's secret societies and oil and banking families that's enslaved humanity. And, truly both are right. But if you just focus, I see so many researchers, and we'll get into this, because the Nephilim, the oldest bloodline of the Nephilim, that is Inky's true hybrid bloodline, comes through the Native American Indians.
Yes.
And it's proven now. All this is going to be revealed very soon. But, all these researchers who are saying the Nephilim and the Anunnaki are behind, the world's secret societies and have enslaved humanity, ask them, what does that have to do with the Native American Indians? Absolutely nothing. I am Iroquois on my mother's side, Seneca, and Erie Montauk on my father's side. And, we have been, how can I say this? The Native American Indians have suffered at the hands of the New World Order Illuminati worse than any other race on this planet. The genocide that was committed against the Native Americans, some people put it as high as 100 million Native American Indians were slaughtered and killed. You know, so right there, you know, is another huge misconception of people who are throwing the Anunnaki under the proverbial bus. And I'd like to say, you know, they're only focusing on Team Bad Cop, and half a truth is no truth at all.
You know, let's touch on that, Michael, about the real true ancestry of most of the Native Americans here in North America. You know, when we go back to the 1820s in America, and it was called the Manifest Destiny, the governing factors were basically taught and teaching the people and were implementing this manifest destiny, in that the natives were dumb, they were ignorant, they were slaves, they were stupid,
Savages.
and they were savages, and they were less people, and they should not be here. And that's what gave the rise and why the government okayed the literal largest probably genocide of any race on the history of the human planet. Mm-hmm. We think, and we talk so much about what happened, you know, in Germany with the slaughter of the Jews. That's just peanuts of what the Americans, the early governmental Americans in the 1800s, did to the natives that were here. They basically came out, wiped them out, slaughtered them, and just said, you aren't even worthy of living here, and then shoved them off into reservations and say, this is where you're going to go and live. But little did they know, and in the process, they destroyed most of their history, the archaeology of the history. But what's now starting to come out is what is called, you talk about these serpent mounds. And the serpent mounds of the Native Americans were the equivalent of dimensionality and energetically of the pyramids in Egypt.
Absolutely.
They were basically energy centers of what I call, you know, vibrational energy that literally comes up out of the earth. And they were very much in touch with this. But here's what they're beginning to discover. And a lot of this is in Ohio and in the Ohio Valley. Mm-hmm. And if you think the Anunnaki weren't present, what we are starting to understand now, that since the late 1800s, the Smithsonian has lied to us and hidden from us the giant skeletons that they found. They knew that was there, but they were told that they could not tell us because it went against the history of what we were being taught, and it went against the whole concept of the manifest destiny, because basically it would take all of our history and totally blow it out and just say everything we had been taught was incorrect. But you can't deny what they're still continuing to find today. At least today they're beginning to admit the truth. They are finding over and over skeletal remains where these skeletons are 10 feet, 12 feet, and sometimes as much as 20 feet tall.
Yes, indeed.
How do you look at this and say, it's here, it's right here, and a lot of it is in the state of Ohio, and also in these serpent mounds is where they're beginning to find this. But here's the thing that was interesting. Most of us know about the biblical history of the 10 Commandments that Moses had brought down, engraved on this stone tablet, and brought down to the Israelites that were there. But the thing is, what they found recently in one of the archaeological digs in Ohio.
In Newark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, was a stone tablet that was determined to be 3,000 years old, and on it was engraved original Hebrew writing, and it was the 10 Commandments, the same exact thing that came down, that Moses brought down off Mount Sinai. Engraved in stone tablet in Hebrew was the 10 Commandments, and they found it in Ohio. Yeah. And it's determined to be 3,000 years old. How in the world did that get there? What we're seeing is the connection. Because when you understand your biblical history, and then when you read the ancient Sumerian tablets, you find that most of your Old Testament, predominantly the history, the first 1,000, from the time of the book of Genesis, all the way up till the time of King David and King Saul, most of that history is paralleled and is a condensed version of what is coming out in the ancient Sumerian tablets. The ancient Sumerian tablets are basically the history of the Bible in a larger form, And so what we can see is that even the ancient Israelites in the Old Testament were all descendants of the Anunnaki. They were Anunnaki descendants that had come down from the Enlil line. And what we're finding now is a lot of the Native Americans were Anunnaki descendants as well that had come down through the Enki line.
Yeah, because as I was saying, Enki was known as the water bearer, or the man holding, the bucket of water. And this gets really interesting because, Edgar Cayce is a big part of this as well. But Edgar Cayce called the Atlanteans the Poseidians, which is, again, Enki was known as Poseidon, Neptune, Ptah in Egypt, under different names. But as I said, the elders stayed behind on Atlantis. And the last time of the last earth change that took out the continent of Atlantis, they went to the left and intermingled into the Mayan culture. And then later on, they went right up through the middle of the United States and became known as the mound builders culture. And see, a lot of people think that these mound sites, like in Newark and Cahokia and Eastlake, Ohio is going to become a big one, Eastlake Willoughby, that Native American Indians built these. And the Native American Indians will tell you themselves, they didn't build these sites, they inherited them. And so the question is, the mound builders predate the Native American Indians by thousands of years. And so who are the mound builders? What I can tell you is your listeners can go and just Google DNA space haplogroup, HAPLOGROUP X2A. This is a brand new DNA haplogroup that was just discovered in 1998. That's not that long ago. The only place on this planet that haplogroup X2A DNA, by the way, I am haplogroup X2A, which fits in, with the Nephilim. The only place that has this X2A DNA is these tall skeletal remains that have been taken out of the mounds. And 3% of the Native American Indians still to this day have haplogroup X2A, but that number could be way higher because not too many Native American Indians have had their blood work done. It's just that simple. But so right here is a nice talking point because, as you said, it's no question that a few generations ago the mound builders were giants, but now we're not. I am haplogroup X2A, and I'm about 6 foot. So something has happened to reduce the stature of the Nephilim from a few generations ago to now. I think this is just my own opinion, but it could get into why abductions are even happening, that this genetic work hasn't stopped, and so we could fit in and not stand out like a sore thumb, that the stature of the Nephilim has been reduced. But what's interesting is that when any DNA, you can trace it back in time and see exactly the migration of where that DNA came from. And haplogroup X2A does not follow the normal migration route that we've been taught, this Asian migration route for all the other tribes and peoples into America. When you trace back haplogroup X2A, where you find the highest concentration of that DNA type is home base, where they were in the past. Do you want to tell them?
Yes, and this is what is fascinating, folks. And this is the science that we're coming out that proves unquestionably, without a doubt, what's going on here. Haplogroup X2A here in North America is predominantly found in the skeletal remains in Ohio in these mounds. But where is its home based? In Galilee, in ancient Israel. So there we see again, it was the ancient Israelites through the biblical history,
the
lost tribes of Israel. They are the ones that were the Anunnaki descendants with this haplogroup X2A DNA. And the only two places where it's found in concentration is around the areas of Galilee, in current and ancient Israel, and in the Ohio Valley.
Ohio, New York, and Pennsylvania.
Ohio,
mostly,
New York. Okay,
mostly Ohio.
Yeah.
And this gets into an interesting thing too. You know what? This would be cool because Dave came and stayed with me for a few days, and I showed him in my hometown. Not only I found out that there was an ancient mound site there, but you want to tell him about the Lost Nation Road and the site? And
you know, it's well. First, let's take a step back because it's so interesting. Because when you were working with A.R. Borden, he said, Michael, you don't understand the significance of where you physically live because you've lived in that East Lake, Ohio area your whole life.
Yes, it's
your whole life.
Childhood.
East Lake, Ohio is the home of the original mound builders within that vicinity.
Yes.
It's where they are finding these ancient skeletons. It's where they're finding this DNA. But remember, when you go back into that area, these streets and roads were named well over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it's also known as the area that was known as the Lost Nations. And here's what's interesting. Less than 5 miles from Michael's home is this road that's called Lost Nation Road. And it comes up and it intersects, you know, with East Lake Avenue. And then you keep going down Lakeshore Avenue. Mm-hmm. And you keep going down Lakeshore Avenue, and then you see all these street names. And the street names are the names of all of the ancient Native American tribes in the region. Go ahead and tell us what some of those street names are.
Well, what you can do is you can check this out yourself. Go to Google Earth, type in Lost Nation Road, Ohio. Follow Lost Nation Road up until it dead ends at Lake Erie, because that's what happened. The mound builders came up into the bottom of the North American continent, taught the Mayans the Mayan calendar, pyramid building, taught them what they knew about higher physics, and but when they started killing other people, you know, to try somehow, but see, this is why it's important to put this timeline in. 27,000 years ago, this experiment to accelerate human consciousness was put in. Now we're talking 10,000 years ago for the Mayans. This experiment was well underway, and this darkness set in, and they thought, well, maybe we need to start killing each other to make these people happy. Well, the mound builders, the Atlanteans, went, you know what? Let's keep moving right up through the middle of the continent.
Let's leave the Mayans. We don't want to stay here with these people that are sacrificing humans and killing each other like that.
I don't think they're getting it.
Right. They're not quite getting it. And
so they came up right until up through the middle of the North American continent until they dead ended on Lake Erie. And once you go to the end of Lost Nation Road on Google Earth, take a left and you'll get to East Lake Middle School. That was the site of the first mound builders location on North America. This is going to be revealed in the very near future.
And what's interesting, this is only a couple miles from where you physically live right now.
Yeah.
It's only a couple miles from where you were filming all of those UFOs over Lake Erie. And and here you yourself are Iroquois Indian. You're learning about all this history. And yet you have lived right there since you were shortly after you were born.
Indeed. Yeah. And this site in East Lake, Ohio, East Lake Willoughby, if anyone wants to research this too, just type in mound site Reeves Road, Reeves was the location of this first mound site. It had walls that were 660 feet long and 20 foot high in a square around this Cahokia type pyramid there. And it was one of the largest Indian concentrations in North America. No one knows this yet. But so you go to the end of Lost Nation Road and you take a left, and within 1.5 miles, you're at the location of the first mound builder site in the world. But if you take a right instead of a left, the first roads you come to, and you'll see this on Google Earth, is Iroquois. And people might not know this. Iroquois is a confederacy of originally 5 different tribes. And that's a really interesting story how they united. But so some of the tribes of the Iroquois, when you take a right off of Lost Nation Road, you come to Iroquois, and then you come to Seneca, Cherokee, Mohawk. It's almost like when you take a left, you see the first site of the mound builders. When you take a right, you see what happened to the Lost Nation, what they became. And what's interesting is this truly is, one of the lost tribes of Israel, the Sangreal, the Holy Grail. Mm-hmm. And it said that Templars brought, when they began to become persecuted, back in Israel, and, the Templars are the ones who took the Holy Grail, took the Sangreal. No one has known where it went to. Well, it went to Eastlake, Ohio.
Yeah.
And the Templars, people might know, they've been very involved in behind the scenes, the creation of the United States. A lot of Washington's streets create sacred geometry. So my best guess it's the Templars who put almost like written in the location a map of what happened to the Lost Nation. And I can tell you the Cleveland Natural History Museum is right in the middle right now of doing a multi-million-dollar renovation to announce all of this, because through some places in Ohio, they were known as the Hopewell. And in Eastlake, there's a monument that sits at that school now, and it says it's the Whittlesey Indian culture. Well, Hopewell was the name of the farmer who had some mounds on his site, and so Hopewell doesn't have anything to do with the Indian culture. Similarly, in Eastlake, Whittlesey was the last name of the Army surveyor who surveyed the site in the late 1800s. Nothing to do with the Indian culture. So right now they're looking at renaming this mound builder culture. I don't know what name they've come up with, but I am working with the Eastlake Historical Society. And, what had happened was, because of the History Channel revealing what this blood anomaly, they told me if I could contact my biological parents, because I was adopted, I should, to see if this was something hereditary. So for the first time in late 2008, I met my biological mother, and I met my two sisters. And that's when I found out that my great-grandfather was pureblood Seneca Iroquois Indian. And I found out my father's side comes through what's called the Montauk Indians.
What's so interesting about this, Michael, is, those street names were given 120, 140, 160 years ago.
Yeah.
And so while Manifest Destiny was in the process of leveling these mounds and all the pyramids that were there, trying to destroy any record of the Native American presence that was
Someone was saving
Someone
it.
else was saving it
Yes.
by naming the streets.
Yeah.
Lost Nation Road and the streets of the tribes that were there in this very, very unique location.
Indeed.
And you see, I don't think any of this is coincidence, that here you are, you are Nephilim, you've lived there, you grew up there, you're also basically Iroquois Indian, and all of them are descendants of the Anunnaki, which brings us full circle around to why it is we have an appropriate understanding of who the Anunnaki really is. And I talk about this in my workshops, and I've brought this before you. You have the two sons of Anu, Enki and Enlil. Now, I only use this as a metaphor, but what you quite often see in these two sons is the bad cop, good cop role of the two different bloodlines that comes all the way down to us today in how we are, because we know and understand that we have what is called, the Cabal, the Illuminati, the controllers of the world, that we see in them, the reptilians and all this kind of stuff, that becomes the bad cop metaphor, that as a metaphor comes down through Enlil. And then on the Enki side, we see the Native Americans, who for literally hundreds and well over 1,000 years were peaceful, were loving, were caring, where they got along with each other. They operated in very large tribes. When you go into the Cahokia there in the St. Louis, Missouri area, they about 1,000 years ago had a city of over 200,000 people. It was one of the largest cities on this planet
Yeah.
at that time, and you never see that talked about in our American history.
We were told that when Columbus got here, there was nothing going on.
That's
you
right.
know, it could be nothing further from the truth. And really what's interesting is I have discovered, because the Anunnaki has been guiding me into what I call the most harmonious cosmic frequencies that truly create geometry. Because, you know, you can get to geometry through high math, but you can also get it through just frequency. And this gets into a subject matter of the most cosmic harmonious frequency is 432 hertz, not our present musical standard of 440. And, you know, it was Pythagoras who started to understand that, you know, if you want to find the octave, and people that it's not a musician might not know what an octave is. Say everyone's familiar with a piano, and say your middle A note on a piano, say you do have it tuned properly to 432. Well, you still got a lower A note when you go to the left, and then another lower one. Every 8, you know, keys, you're going to get an octave of that, and it's really simple math. You just divide by 2. So when you have 432 hertz as your reference in your middle A note, the next lower octave will be 216 hertz, because 216 and 216 is 432. And then similarly, 108 is the next lower octave. And what I can tell you is when you look into the dimensions of these mound sites, that one wall will be 1,080 feet long. Another wall will be 2,160 feet long. Well, that's 216 and 108. They're encoding octaves of 432. And what I can tell you is this race, these Atlanteans, the Anunnaki, they've been trying to guide us into, because it gets into leading us into free energy is what's happening.
Right.
But when you look at, you know, a lot of people know right out of Sumeria, we came out of the gate with full culture. We had, you know, systems of timekeeping, you know, government, mathematics, just right out of the gate. Well, time as we know it now, you know, we got an hour and then, you know, minutes and then seconds. For all intent purpose, you know, I know there's milliseconds and stuff, but for normal day-to-day use, your wristwatch, you know, the second is the lowest time slice that we use. Well, get your calculators out and see how many seconds is in 12 hours. It's 43,200.
You know, it's interesting as where all this is fitting together, and when we look at what is the history and of the Anunnaki and their influence of us on a good side here in the planet. You go to the Mayans. The Mayans were known as the best absolute calendar and timekeepers that ever existed.
Yes.
Who taught them that? The Anunnaki.
Mm-hmm.
We go to Stonehenge, and Stonehenge is known as being this mysterious, you know, place that resonates in conjunction with the harmony, with the astrological issues and stuff like that. Well, who built Stonehenge? The Anunnaki. We go to the pyramids in Egypt. Who built the pyramids in Egypt? The architect is Thoth, an Anunnaki.
Yeah.
And even when we go to Makapuchu, who helped build that? The Anunnaki. They are not the ones that in history are saying we did all this. It was the other local cultures, but they were the ones that taught the local cultures.
Well, the local cultures, all, you know, all of them said, well, these sky people came down and they showed us all this.
When you go into the biblical history, when you go into Genesis chapter 6, verse 2, it said the Nephilim, they were what the gods that came from the sky. So, and it's interesting.
Serpent people.
The serpent people. And it's interesting is because, see, in the book of Genesis predominantly, I mean, even so the first 5 books of the Bible, what's called the Pentateuch, you see God with the big G, and then you see God, the little g gods. And, you know, the Bible doesn't talk about who these little g gods are, but who are the little g gods? The alien ET races that were present on the planet at that time with them, and they saw them as gods, is what they had done. And then the Bible interpreters, the Bible translators basically said, hey, somewhere in these ancient Hebrew texts, we have to find what is called, you know, the sovereign God, the big G God. And so they gave the names Yahweh and Adonai and Elohim as the big G gods. And who are the Adonai, the Yahweh and the Elohim? Well, the Sumerian records would tell us that Yahweh was Enlil, Adonai was Enki, and the Elohim
Enki's mother.
was Enki's mother.
Yes.
You
Or
see,
Enki's mother's race.
Enki's mother's race.
Yes.
So you see, they saw them, the writers of the Bible saw them as these majestic gods.
You know what blows my mind? Doesn't this conflict too? Because here you have absolute proof that they've been trying. Because check this out. Your listeners can do this as well. Take 432 and square it. 432 times 432. What you're going to find out, it is the speed of light within 1% accuracy. So when you take Einstein's equation of E equals mc squared, which all of our physics is now flowered from that. E is energy, m is mass, c is the speed of light. So the only frequencies, and first of all, our quantum physicists now know everything is both particle and wave. Well, E equals mc squared is only the particle part of the equation. It's right there, mass, m,
Right.
you know.
Mhm.
So when you find out that 432 squared is the speed of light, and I'd be willing to say it's not. They just rounded it up. You know, it's not just 186,000 miles perfect. But anyhow, the only frequencies that are going to plug into C of E equals mc squared are 432 base frequencies. And when you run that backwards, then 432 squared becomes C squared times mass equals energy.
Mhm.
No other frequencies are going to do it. And since 432 squared is the speed of light, they're the only frequencies that are truly components of light. And as we know, everything is created from light. Physical matter is light that is slowed down its molecular rate, almost like water. You know, water can go through these phase states where it goes from a gas to a liquid to a solid when its molecule slows down its spin and it becomes solid. Whereas if it speeds up, it becomes liquid. You know. So I think it's a great way to show if they meant us just to enslave us, and you know, and they're all these researchers that are depicting the Anunnaki as the ones behind the Illuminati and the New World Order. The truth of the matter is the exact opposite. They've been trying to guide us into higher realms of new physics, new life physics, as they are called it. You know,
it's interesting because I know you talk about this on the 432 hertz, and the reality is everything that we understand as matter that comprises all of the items is really vibration of sound. And the significance of 432 is that it is the harmonious frequency that almost everything comes out of. And as we line up with that, we take our physical bodies and we line up with the 432 hertz harmony, we will find that it is going to rapidly shift and change our DNA and help us through our own ascension and evolving process.
Indeed.
Let's do this. You and I have been going for a little over an hour and a half, and I have to basically make an apology because we haven't brought Blanca into the discussion. So, Blanca, my
Hi,
dear,
Blanca.
you've been listening to Michael and I go for about an hour and a half.
Share
with us some of your thoughts.
You guys can really weave a tale. Let me put it that way. But no, it's
but our tale is based on scientific and historical fact.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, T with a capital T. But no, it's a wonderful tale actually, and makes a lot of sense, and gives us a lot of what I would say inspiration to plug into those aspects of ourselves that we know are able to transmute some of the lower energies that we tend to entertain. I'm curious, Michael, because you've told this story, and I'm sure you've had a lot of people challenge it or come with a different point of view, but why do you think this particular story of where the Anunnaki wanted to participate, guide us, help us in this conscious evolution, and even by becoming incarnate and going through a very difficult, I'm sure, experience on both sides, good cop and bad cop. Why do you think that particular storyline did not emerge as much as some of the other storylines about the Anunnaki?
Very good question. What I can tell you, look into the Sumerian kings list. These Anunnaki beings lived very, very long lives, partly because of their genetic knowledge and their, putting gold in a monatomic state and inhaling it and having it fire on their DNA. But these Anunnaki, the Sumerian king list, they were slated, they knew at this part of the processional cycle. By the way, they told me when I met them that their own succession of kingship and how they related to humanity was totally based on a processional cycle, and I didn't know what that was even at the time. But it's, people will recognize the whole folklore of moving into the age of Aquarius out of the age of Pisces. And during these switches, like from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, they would have a change of leadership, and how they dealt with humanity would change as well. Well, what I can tell you is one of them, this gets into an interesting thing because, Enlil was definitely, up until the flood, Enlil was bad cop. He didn't look favorably upon the creation of mankind in the first place. But from the flood on, when this experiment got put in to accelerate human conscious evolution, what had happened was Enki's son was named Marduk. He became known as Amun-Ra in Egypt. But he was slated hundreds of thousands of years ago that he would be taking the earth throne, because they told me, the Anunnaki told me they had two thrones. One was earth-based, in the earth realm, and then the other one was on Nibiru. And so very long ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was already stated that at the age of Pisces, Marduk would gain the earth throne. But as we just, revealed, that this experiment was put in only 27,000 years ago. So after all this, what had happened was, when this experiment was thought of, Marduk was already gaining the earth throne, and he took on the spiritual task of reflecting back a negative polarity to mankind. So talking about the Dark Age, you know what I mean?
Right.
It was Marduk's role to see how dark we would take it. And they said we took it way darker than they ever even imagined. We had a lot of shadow work to do. But really, in essence, that's why this has been withheld, because humans under Marduk decided, and, look into the protocols of Sion. It's ugly. I can tell you,
right.
Team Bad Cop has a playbook. You know what I mean? If a human wants to go down that path of the dark path, there's a playbook, and it is the protocols of Sion. And that Marduk became known as Baal, and the Illuminati are Baal worshippers. Well, they're catering to a multidimensional being whose spiritual task it is to reflect back their own negativity. So, the answer to your question is humans that have decided somehow by thinking that they're superior over others or whatever, that they're being brainwashed with the protocols of Sion, have decided that it was in their best interest to keep us in the dark.
Got it. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Well,
what we're seeing is a shift and change. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, what we're seeing is the shift and change, but the shift and change doesn't happen overnight. There was these turning points. And Michael talked about, the real shift that changed. Well, one of them was in 2009, and the other one was, December 2012. While those are energetic shifts, it doesn't shift us overnight. But we are going through, a shift and change ourselves as a human race. And all this ties in. We haven't even touched yet on the whole Wingmakers project and what's there on the wingmakers.com. And Michael's association with being connected with the Wingmakers, because remember, it was Dr. Neruda who was a part of the Labyrinth group who basically, now, and what's interesting is that, folks, we would really encourage you to go read what is called the Neruda interviews on wingmakers.com. And there you see is where Dr. Neruda broke off from the Labyrinth group as the Wingmakers were communicating with him. And in there he talks about 15. Now, 15 is a code name for an individual. And he doesn't necessarily paint 15 in a very positive light. But 15 is A.R. Borden. And remember, A.R. Borden was the one that the Anunnaki communicated with for close to 40 years. A.R. Borden is the one that took Michael underneath his own wings, almost adopted him like a son, and taught him for 5 years until he died about 3 years ago. But what Michael will say is that Borden knew exactly what was going on. Borden was willing to basically be painted into a bad light. And when you have what is called the 5 interviews in, the Dr. Neruda interviews, the first 4 interviews were released 18 years ago, but the 5th interview wasn't released until just 2 years ago. And when you read that 5th interview and what Neruda talks about, he really gives he paints the picture again of what we talk about, this whole duality consciousness and this whole issue of separation. And he is saying that the human race is now going through this major transition, and we are moving into what is called human 3.0. And what Neruda says, and actually Michael says we're actually going to go to a 5.0, but I'm coming back to what Neruda talks about is 3.0. Human 1.0 were basically the Homo
Neanderthal?
The Neanderthals that came in at that point in time. The Homo sapiens came, the human 2.0s, and they had upgrades along the way. Well, we are now going through a major shift and moving into 3.0, and that's what Neruda talks about. And the old and 3.0 is going to have 2 versions. One version are going to be those that are willing to undo the separation. They are willing to move out of separation consciousness. But for those that aren't ready to do that, they're going to become the 3.0, what is called artificial intelligence version.
Transhumanist.
And
it's not a good path either.
It's not a good path. It's a path that basically means that you're going to be programmed. You aren't going to really have a choice. You think you're going to have free will, but really your whole life, the larger issues of life are programmed for you, and you're going to stay into what is called the separation, conflict, warring, etc., and stuff like that in duality consciousness. But those that are willing to move in and move out of separation, duality consciousness become what he uses the term the sovereign integral. And here's what's interesting. That totally lines up and parallels everything that my guest last week talks about, Gary Renard. He says that everything in life is about just one thing. It's about undoing the separation. And as a human race, we have a choice. And what his 2 ascended masters come in and say, you think you have this great free will, but the only free will that you really, really have is to undo the separation, and whether or not you're going to choose to do that. And if you choose not to, then expect the fact that you're going to be here called on recycle, i.e. reincarnation, and your life will continue to reincarnate over and over, and you'll continue to go through the bad cop role of reflecting your own bad cop, what is called, separation consciousness, until you choose to say, I don't want that anymore, and then start working about your own ascension process, your own enlightenment process to work yourself out of this separation consciousness. And that's why I talk about all this.
Well, we've got to have Michael back to just go into all the Wingmaker stuff, because there's a lot there too that, like you say, parallels with the Course in Miracles. And really, if this is about our awakening, I think there's a lot of good material that to bring to that in kind of a more scientific point of view. But another question I had is, okay, so there was this experiment about helping humanity with their conscious evolution, especially because they wanted us to be ready for this December 2012 date. And, of course, we made it. so that's good. Yay for humanity.
Indeed.
So now, how does that impact their role? Are they still good cop, bad cop? Are they transitioning their role with us? Mm-hmm.
They told me when I met them in 2008, when they told me that how they relate to humanity and their succession of kingship was based on the processional cycle, they said the day we entered the age of Aquarius, this experiment in duality consciousness or separation consciousness ended. And we would either made it or we would have not made it. And they said that we've made it. They said that in their own words, we've earned the right to be treated as equals. And so now it's moving mankind from reality A to reality B. And reality B is the prophesied golden age where mankind will be freed from the Illuminati, freed from this economic slavery system that we've been under, and we will be able to flourish as a human species and flourish in our creativity. And it's going to happen in the twinkling of an eye. By the way, your listeners could, like I said, it's already been announced that there's another planet in our solar system. I can tell you from two different sources now. One was A.R. Borden and the group that I was brought into. They said 2036 is the accurate arrival date of the planet. I can tell you because of, I started being taken in by the Native American Indian tribal elders, and Chief Golden Light Eagle is the guy that organizes the Star Knowledge conferences, and he's brought me in as the mound builder kind of representative, the Iroquois representative with these. So I'm doing a conference with him recently, and he's sitting right next to me during a panel a panel talk, and out of nowhere he says, I just want to tell everyone that Spirit has given us the permission. We have now reached out to all the world leaders and let them know Nibiru will be arriving in 2036. And so there's two different sources of information with the exact same date. But what I can tell you is when I met the Anunnaki in 2008, once they discovered who I truly was, because at the first who I met was Marduk, and he was in his bad cop role, and once it wasn't fun. But after they scanned my Akashic records and they said they understood who I was, then they said, wow, we've been waiting for you to show up. It's a miracle that you're sitting here. We don't understand how it even came to be, but now that you're here, we'd like to have a council meeting. And I said, well, I don't know what you're talking about, but what do you want to talk about in this meeting? And he said that in the very near future, there would be another celestial object visible in our skies, and it wouldn't be debatable. It's worldwide. Everyone's going to see it, and it would lead people to this Zachariah Sitchin. They told me there was this professor who had decoded this stuff, and it would lead people to him, and then they would learn that the planet's inhabited and learn lots about to be revealed too of what's under the sand in Egypt. There's whole complexes, the Hall of Records, that Edgar Cayce prophesied about. It's all there. And look into the work of a lady named Carmen Bolter, who she did the pyramid code for the History Channel. She type in Carmen Bolter New Egyptian site or something. Just look into her work. You'll come across what I'm talking about. People are about to learn hidden history and the Anunnaki subject, and it's going to be visible in our skies. I guess my whole point is right now, there's second sun sightings starting to happen. Sooner or later, it's going to get to the point where it'll be 24/7 in our sky and it won't be debatable. And it's going to happen well before 2036. So then humanity is going to have a little buffer, a little time to process what this means for humanity. And what I was told is the Nephilim will be resurfacing again. The Knights Templar will be resurfacing, and they will be releasing to the world what they call the Council of World Teachers, who will be I am a part of that council, and we will be disseminating information like we're doing right now, for the
right.
Yeah, so
That's
we got an
very
interesting
wonderful.
20 years.
Well,
coming up.
we've been talking about how thoughts create energy, and what a lovely thought to hold. That indeed the duality has been stopped, and now if there's any duality, it's of our creation. So why don't we just stop creating it and focus on that? Focus on our potential.
Right on.
Focus on our
Choose
potential to
something
love.
higher, right?
Right,
You know,
exactly, and to support each other and create and be prosperous, and to forgive, as the teaching says. If we forgive the illusion, it'll start fading.
Indeed.
Blanca, it's interesting because, where Michael says that they said the date that they gave that we entered into the new Aquarian age was February 14th, 2009.
Yeah.
And they said from that point on is when, in essence, Marduk wasn't playing the bad cop role anymore. So, but why then do we still see these reminiscences of, Cabal, Illuminati, and all this stuff? What we really had were the human minions that were programmed to have this type of a leadership. But what we're beginning to read and see is that they're losing their power. So the shift doesn't happen overnight. It's not like, okay, February 14th, 2009, boom, everything's done, everything's shifted, everything's changed it, all the bad guys have gone away. No, it takes a natural progression because they have to work through their own stuff as well. And here we are now about 7 years down the road, and we're still unworking it. And it's being undone. Right. And it is in the process. So it does take a process of time to undo the human behavior part of all of that has come out.
Yeah.
And so that is why there are people who still have their own shadow work. They still have their own stuff inside. And so they're still going to choose to see evil. They're going to choose to still see cabal. And they're going to want to attack and say, we have to get rid of them. And that stuff doesn't, in its full completeness, go away until they have worked through their own separation duality consciousness. But for those of us who are doing it, we don't see them. It's like, I can say, well, there's evil out there, but you know what? I don't experience it. I can say there's cabal that's out there, but you want to know what? I don't experience it. And it was even today, Michael and I were talking about this, the whole issue of chemtrails. There are people that get up so much on a wagon about chemtrails, and they're fearful, and they say, we got to stop this evil. We got to stop all the stuff out there. And there are people here in Sedona that are so high on the chemtrail bandwagon, and guess what? I don't experience chemtrails. I might see them up there, but I don't think about it. I don't worry about it. I don't experience their issues. And yet I've got people right here in Sedona saying they are sick, physically sick, and experiencing chemtrail flu because of all the chemtrails that are in Sedona. It still comes back to your consciousness. How you choose to perceive is what is going to create what you are going to experience. And Michael and I are here to say the Anunnaki, which has played both the bad cop and the good cop roles, they have finished their bad cop role.
What I want to say is what they told me is all bad cop, which was led by Marduk or Amun-Ra and his team of Anunnaki, the day we entered the age of Aquarius, they've all flipped over to good cop.
Yes.
And they're creating what they call event strings, multidimensional, behind the scenes, to create the pathway where we will enter the golden age as painlessly and ripple-free as possible. So we're in good hands. We've made it. And I think there's a lot to be happy, and I'm really excited.
And Michael, here's the key. The Anunnaki have flipped. They're not doing it anymore. So if people out there are saying they're bad, they're evil, they're the reptilians, they are the cabal, it's because they are choosing to still perceive it.
Yeah.
And because they're choosing to perceive it, it's nothing more than a mirror of what is going on in their own subconscious mind, and there are still some of the minions out there that are saying, we're playing this role for you. We would like to get off this role, but that role will be played as long as you choose to perceive it that way.
Yeah.
When you choose through your free will to move into love, compassion, and it's what's called the 6 heart virtues that are talked about in the Wing Makers. When you choose to move into humility, compassion, forgiveness, kindness,
Valor,
and courage, and appreciation. Yes. When you choose to move into these things and make these things be a habitual part of your life, you will undo your concept of separation, and you will find that that is when all those bad dudes fade away.
You'll transmute your shadow side.
Right.
Look into Freud and what he said the shadow self is. I heard one of the Native American grandmothers, she said, that's where we got ouchies along the way. You know, somewhere we were hurt and we shoved it down into our unconscious. And those things they'll be transmuted. And
yeah. Well, we were told we had 90 seconds left. In fact, we're down to about 1 minute. You and I had an absolutely wonderful conversation.
One of the best interviews.
Blanca, anything you want to say to wrap up in about 10 to 15 seconds?
Right. Well, I just think positive note. We all need to remember that we are creating the dream, and so let's dream the dream that wakes us up.
That's right. Indeed. Michael, anything you want to do to wrap up?
Just enjoy yourselves, you know. If you're not having fun, stop it.
Yes. Well, folks, I want to thank you for joining all of us tonight here on the Sedona Connection. Michael, thank you so much for being my guest tonight. I think this has the potential to be one of those foundational programs that people can go back and listen to, and to have a very clear understanding of who truly are the Anunnaki. Because tonight I was able to have right here beside me an absolute, very deep, strong source of he is an Anunnaki, he is a Nephilim, and he was tutored by A.R. Borden, who was a guy who worked with the Anunnaki for 40 years. I think that's pretty good source information. So, folks, we want to thank you for all of us for joining us tonight. They're telling me it's time to be done. Thank you, all of you. We'll see you next week. Okay, good night.